Okay, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. I am Dave Von Heater. Today is our January meeting of PCIC, and I'll give you a little background. As you may know, some of you may know, PCIC is a group of leaders from parent groups around our entire school district, from each of our 19 school sites in Livermore Valley Joint Unified School District, along with community partners and district leadership. The purpose of this group is to collaborate through the sharing and exchange of information with LVJUSD to move forward common goals to support the educational needs of all students. Obviously, this forum fits right into this purpose, and so we are hosting it today. It is expanding our monthly PCIC meeting to include other interested members of our community. We invited parents and guardians to submit questions, and we have invited representatives of our district to respond to those questions. Today's webinar will be recorded and shared on Livermore Schools YouTube, as well as the PCIC YouTube channel tomorrow, hopefully this afternoon. I am happy to welcome our panelists today. We have Craig Bueno, Mr. Craig Bueno, the President of the Board of Education, Dr. Kelly Bowers, our Superintendent of Schools, Mr. Chris Van Schack, Deputy Superintendent, Mrs. Carolyn Rijardio, the District COVID-19 Liaison, and Amy Thompson, the President of Livermore Education Association. So we gathered our information, gathered our questions from our community, from PCIC, and the questions submitted through the form that was sent out. We had 77 questions that we grouped into 11 topic areas. Our panelists will respond to each of these topics during today's forum. We will be covering the timeline of reopening, reopening criteria, vaccines, health and safety, hybrid options, middle and high school, schools, schedules, athletics, and senior events, distance learning, small cohorts / learning hubs, the role of our teachers union, role of Board of Education, and next year, 2021-22. 1 second. We realize some additional questions may arise, so please use the Q&A feature to ask questions. We hope to have time today to answer those questions. What we don't answer will be available in an FAQ online after the event. Before answering a question, please review questions that have already been asked. If you see your question, click on the thumbs up to indicate that you also would like to see that question answered. This process will move the most popular questions to the top, and we will do our best to answer those questions today, time permitting. One second. So let's get started. Dr. Bowers, the most frequently asked questions are about our district's timeline for responding to COVID-19 and eventual reopening. Can you please provide us with an overview of our timeline, going back to March when distance learning first began, and also setting the stage for the rest of the school year and beyond?
So thank you, Mr. Von Heater. It's definitely my pleasure to be here. And before I jump right into the questions, I just wanted to thank PCIC and everyone for arranging the forum and for our panelists for taking part. Thanks to all who submitted questions. It helps us know what people are still wondering about and helps us make our responses. Thank you for tuning in. And I really appreciate the new format, real-time FAQs, because despite our best efforts and intentions, still there's often questions out there and even misinformation. And so we really want to make sure that we dispel any kind of varying divisive narratives that could be out there. You know, you hear parents versus union leaders or board members disagreeing with board members, but really we're a unified team. We're here for the same reason. It's all about our kids and their education and their future. And so it's really important that we come away and know that we're in this together. And I think our panel represents us. It's not our only chance to respond though. So please keep in mind, it's just an opportunity to further open up the dialogue, sort of demystify recommendations and decision-making. And what we've found is that our traditional structures, our board meetings, our PCIC, our faculty communication, and our regular updates from community engagement, they might not be quite sufficient in the time of a crisis with all the communications in an ever-evolving situation. So this is our attempt, and we don't anticipate it'll be perfect. Pretty much nothing in 2020, or hopefully 21 will get better, but is perfect, but we're gonna give it our best shot. So we will answer questions, and then we'll spend some time knowing that some of you will question our answers, and that's okay. We don't shy away from tough questions and direct questions. We just always ask that you be respectful and sincere in your questioning. With that in mind, it's important that we also look out to the bigger picture. As our panel goes through and answers these questions, including things about timeline, it's really important for everyone to realize and acknowledge we do have a lot of answers, but we still don't have every answer. This is a public health crisis. It affects education. It affects all of us, but it really isn't an educational crisis per se. If it was educational questions, we would have all those answers. So we do rely on medical and health expert advice and guidance. And it is sometimes conflicting. And the landscape changes constantly. So what you have from us today is our commitment to constantly keep up with all of those updates. But I will give you just 2 brief snapshots before we dive into that timeline. So for instance, when we first began this pandemic journey and response, we were told, and we asked directly to our health experts, should everyone be wearing masks? And we were told definitively, no, only first responders. It is not for the general public, because if the average person were wearing a mask, they would get lulled into a sense of security and think they were immune, and they would be touching their face constantly, which could actually spread. And now look at us. Months later, it's required for everybody. And just even more recently, we've been working so hard to meet the county's requirements for sanitation and disinfecting all of our campuses and our classrooms and all of our contact points. But the governor, just as recently as last week, sent out guidance, and he's pretty much dismissing and reversing that criteria, saying that actually they're more concerned about some of the chemicals that would be in those disinfecting things, and that's not something they're concerned about. So it's just something for you to kind of keep in mind as we go through today. Even our best answers today and our most thorough responses could change, because this is an ever-evolving pandemic, and medical professionals are learning right along with all of us. So to our timeline, let's take a look at that. And looking at the timeline that we've been on for these last several months, seems like forever. Just to reassure you, from day 1 of distance learning that was implemented in March, we have also been simultaneously working on reopening in parallel. So those things have constantly been going on every single step of the way. And we do have some touch points that we've pointed out on the timeline, and we'll definitely make this available too. But at each point, we have been following what our guidance from the county gives us, from what our governor has given us, as well as we've been taking an input along the way from stakeholders. And there's a variety of stakeholders. Certainly there's parents, and then there's our staff, there's our board, there's our public health professionals, our own nurses who are experts. So all of this input comes along. And in each step of the way, we've positioned ourselves for any avenue that's available for us, whether it was positioning ourselves for a waiver process, or then for a reopening plan. And now with the new governor's guidance that just came out, positioning ourselves always to take advantage of whatever we can do and what we can influence, knowing that there's still many things that we can't. And that takes us to where we are today, which is we're just on the brink of the possibilities of reopening. And it is so exciting, but there are still a few factors that must be taken into account and that we can't control. We are in a county where we still have very high numbers and community spread. And so those things impact our decisions. Certainly for another part of the state, we might be making different choices at this time. But we have the will and we have the desire, and we are moving forward constantly and continually, even if it isn't always visible to everybody. But we are definitely trying to make it more visible as we go along.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Bowers. Another question that we all have an interest in, is about reopening. What is the criteria we will use to reopen our schools? How does the governor's new proposal impact our reopening? And basically, what needs to be in place before we can reopen?
So our underlying rationale about reopening, which is definitely on everyone's mind, is, we are planning to reopen, of course. Kids need to be in school. They deserve to be in school. We miss our students. We want them here with us. And we know that is the best environment for them to learn. Even though we've done tremendous improvements with distance learning and we've made the best of it, that is where we want them. And so that is definitely our plan. That being understood, we've been really careful not to make false starts or commitments to things that we couldn't uphold, that we'd have to retract on or go back on due to some of these circumstances I mentioned that are beyond our control. So we keep making continued progress toward the reopening goal. And today you will hear there are some things outside of our sphere of influence, but that doesn't ever deter us from that goal. And as we look at some of the decisions we have made, or even the timelines, we said no sooner than January 19th, because let's just say we had said January 19th, that's today. And clearly the elements would not have allowed us to open today because of the spread and the numbers. And so we have been hesitant, but strategically so, hesitant to make definitive or premature announcements that would lend people to think that something's going to happen and then be disappointed when it doesn't. There are others at the other end of the spectrum. We know many colleges and even some districts locally have already said, we are in distance learning for the rest of the year. That's it. And to me, that's giving up hope way too soon. That's kind of, and I'm not judging them because they have their valid reasons, but we're not in that place. The place we're in is we see the light at the end of the tunnel, and we're getting increasingly optimistic and doing everything we can to position ourselves and safeguard to bring our kids back to our campuses this academic year. So if you've heard to the contrary, then you've been misinformed. This academic year is still very much, and in not only on the radar and in the close prospects, with the vaccination this close to the brink on the very near horizon, my hope, my goal would be to ideally open more fully this spring. So we're cautiously optimistic because our numbers still aren't great, but we've possibly peaked. But we're putting every effort into making it all come together. Dare I say, third trimester would be an amazing goal. Of course, we're so close, and we're getting closer to that reality every single day. But so far as the criteria, I'm going to ask Deputy Superintendent Chris Van Schack, who's been working really closely on all that, to kind of give you an idea of all of the many things. It's not just the will and the intent and the goal and the desire. It's actually, you have to have the plan and you have to have all the elements in place to meet many, many criteria. Mr. Van Schack.
Thank you, Dr. Bowers. As you mentioned, there are a number of agencies who have weighed in on our criteria that we use to reopen our schools. And when I use the term reopening for the purposes of this meeting, I'm talking about fully reopening. I'll also discuss a partial reopening. We've described that as hybrid, but I'm talking about fully reopening our schools to all students who would like to return. And so obviously there's criteria that comes from the state, and that's come out most recently from the governor's proposal that schools open at the kindergarten through second grade level sometime in February, and then expansion beyond that. As you can imagine, Governor Newsom is a politician at heart, and he often gives us goals without sufficient detail. And so then it's our job to create the detail from the proposals he's made. And so we have some state guidance that then filters down to the county. The county has their guidance as well, and we live in Alameda County, which tends to be a bit more strict than some of the other counties, particularly in the far northern regions of California and in Sacramento, even as close as the North Bay. And so we've got more strict guidelines in the county. So our job really is to pull these together. And what I've done today, I think, is tried to simplify that as much as I can, so that I've taken 6 pages worth of checklists and turned them into what I consider to be seven areas for preparation. And I think it's worth stating that we've been working on these probably since last June. And again, these have changed through the course of the months as COVID has changed. But really, we've subcategorized many of the checklist items into more broad categories, again, to simplify things, but also to give us a better understanding ourselves of where we stood in the process. And so this checklist, I think, is a fair representation of those things that we feel need to be in place for us to feel comfortable reopen our schools fully. And again, I think it's worth stating that our job really is to mitigate risk. Those who've talked about COVID understand that COVID is not going away in 2 months or 6 months or a year. It's with us probably forever, frankly. And that safe is a relative term. Safe is a very individualized and subjective term. And so we talk about mitigating risk. And again, our goal is to mitigate risk to the point where we feel comfortable bringing staff and students back to our campuses in large numbers without the same level of concern about possible spreading disease that we feel today. So anyway, to break this down just a little bit more clearly, is we have our personal protective equipment. Again, that's masks, shields, gloves, all of the things that really have been in the forefront really since the beginning. I know there's some conversation about masks at the beginning, but really since the beginning. And so we feel very confident that we have the supplies necessary and the ability to disperse those to employees. And so again, you'll see a green check there because we're confident that we're in a great place. We have our cleaning and sanitization. Even though the criteria seems to be changing a little bit, we've purchased the supplies, we have the staffing necessary, we have the protocols in place, we have the ability to clean and sanitize classrooms and common areas to keep our employees and our students safe. And so that's an area we feel very confident in today. Ventilation was a major issue, and that is the ability to clean the air. Again, with COVID being an airborne virus, it's really important that air be cleaned on a regular basis. The CDC has some recommendations there that we want to ensure that we've exceeded. And so we have upgraded our heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems. We put in new filters. We've ordered enough new filters to get us through another full year. We've begun the process of identifying even the smallest of spaces in which ventilation is a concern and ordering portable units. And so again, we are very confident that we have met the ventilation guidelines set forth by both the CDC and even the more stringent guidelines that we've set for ourselves. Fourthly, we have logistical protocols, and this is a rather large area, multiple pages on our checklist that have to do with how students will enter and exit school, how visitors check in, how we do screening, whether it's passive screening or active screening, temperature checks. Do we have enough thermometers on our school sites? Do we have adequate hallway space? Do we have a plan in place to separate desks? All those fall into the category of logistical protocols. And again, we are feeling very confident, very comfortable that that is not an area that we have concern with. Those are things that have been within our control, and those are areas that we've been addressing since the very beginning. And I know it's difficult oftentimes for the community to see. It's not like a construction project where you can drive by and you can see the work being done and the tractors moving and boards going up. A lot of this work has been done behind the scenes, and honestly, with kids not in school, a lot of people haven't been there to see the steps that we've been taking, but we have. The three things that remain unchecked, first is the community spread. And when we take a look at the current status of our county, you can see the tiered system, which begins with yellow and goes through orange, red, and purple. We are in what they consider to be deep purple now. Purple constitute more than 7 new cases per 100,000. In the county, we are at 41 and an unadjusted rate of 46. So that is significantly beyond 7, which is needed for purple. The plans that the governor have set forth suggest that we get at least below 25 for 5 consecutive days. There are other recommendations by the county that we be into the red tier for 14 consecutive days before it's safe to fully reopen. So again, we have some competing agencies, but our goal is to get ourselves into a place where the community spread is under control. And again, that's one of the 7 criteria that we've established. The other 2 criteria involve testing and tracing. And that primarily has to do with the testing of employees and the ability to trace folks that they've been in contact with, so that if there is a positive case, then we're able to slow the spread as much as we can. That will eventually include testing, we think, of students as well. That has become a part of the governor's proposal. And so we are likely to see some testing program for our students. That is underway. We begin our employee testing this week. And the next step, the 7th phase, is vaccination. And I think, as Dr. Bowers alluded to, we do see the light at the end of the tunnel finally. We see vaccines on the way. Employees of the school district are in tier 1B, which means that we are next in line behind healthcare workers, along with first responders, to get vaccinated. And so we are really excited because, again, with these seven criteria being met, we are very confident that we can bring back students in large numbers. And I know there is some disagreement in both the educational community and the community in general about the role that vaccines play in this. Again, some feel it's not as necessary. Some feel as though we shouldn't open until all students are vaccinated. So there certainly is a spectrum of opinion. But again, in our role is to ensure the health and safety of 14,000 students and their families, along with 1,500 employees and their families. And I guess I would say to the community that, when these 7 criteria are met, we will feel very confident standing up in front of all the people in this community and saying, we're ready to get kids back to school in large numbers, understanding that some will still not feel comfortable, but we will feel confident saying that, we can bring 2,000 students back to Granada High School.
Great, thank you, Mr. Van Schack. Many of our parents want to know how the vaccine may impact and hopefully improve our ability to reopen our schools to an in-person learning. Can you provide us with more information about the vaccine?
Thank you, Mr. Von Heater. I would love to address this, as vaccines are a great topic to talk about. And I'm excited and encouraged to share that several of the Livermore School District nurses have received our first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. As healthcare workers, we took advantage of a unique opportunity within our county to begin this process. It is our hope that we will be able to vaccinate the LVJUSD employees when we move to the next phase, which is 1B, like Mr. Van Schack said, in the future. These vaccines, in my opinion, are going to be game changers in this fight against the community spread and another tool in our belt to begin reopening schools. Unfortunately, the supply of vaccine is not nearly enough yet to meet demand, but the district nurses are ready, willing, and able to assist our district and the Livermore community by staffing vaccination clinics when we have enough doses for all. So far, Alameda County has received approximately 85,000 doses, with the majority of those going to healthcare partners for about 47,000. 11,000 have already been administered, but we're going to need many, many more doses to help mitigate the increase in community spread that we're all seeing right now. But we're encouraged, and there's a county community vaccine advisory group, and they're discussing opening schools as vaccination sites. And so the district nurses are ready to begin that process when we are able.
And in addition, we have already had sort of a test site we piloted, and we had a flu vaccination clinic, which of course is not quite the scale, but at least we did do that, and we used Junction School. So we have a protocol in place that positions us very well to become hopefully a site for vaccinations to be administered here in Livermore.
Thank you, Dr. Bowers, and thank you, Mrs. Reggiardo. We have had a number of questions about our health and safety protocols. What do we have in place, and will we need to continue with these even if all staff is vaccinated before we come back?
So once again, we're going to ask Mr. Van Schack, our deputy, to respond.
I think to answer the second part of that first, absolutely. I think this has changed the way that we will keep ourselves safe probably forever. I mean, in terms of hand washing and things like that. So absolutely, many of the things that we've put in place over the last 10 months will continue well beyond the date of getting staff and students vaccinated. With that in mind, as you'll know from seeing the 7 criteria from before, almost all of those have to do with health and safety. As Dr. Bowers mentioned at the beginning, this isn't an education crisis, this is a health crisis. And we will continue to really take the lead from our health officials. We do have protocols in place for sanitizing classrooms and common areas. Those protocols may change as more evidence comes out about the effectiveness of those sanitization processes, but we will continue. We have screening in place for all of our employees. Right now it's a passive screening, which means essentially people fill out a questionnaire each time they come to work. That could become a more active screening process, really depending on the community spread, but we are prepared for that. We obviously are will be in a process when we return with students. It's about education. And we have spent the better part of 2 decades teaching students to work together in group and socialize and solve problems in pairs and in trios. And we're going to have to spend some time encouraging them to spend more time away from each other than we think is educationally sound, but that's going to be necessary for a while. And so washing of hands, teachers, at the elementary level have been doing that for years. I think they're going to have to remind and encourage and practice with students even more than before. So those are processes in place. I know our nurses have done an amazing job of tracing our positive cases. And so we do have processes in place for when there are positive cases, whether they're employees or in classrooms. Again, I think it's just critical to recognize, and since the very beginning, our energies have been focused on developing processes geared around keeping people healthy. And so again, I want to speak very confidently that when students return to campus, we will have policies and practices and protocols in place to encourage and to keep students and staff safe. So very confident in that area. Again, that's been our focus for months.
And I would add that we do have a number of students who've been participating in cohorts and small learning groups on our campuses in a variety of different levels, whether it's special education, athletics, and throughout that we are actually piloting and practicing all of those methods, and they've proven to work. But unfortunately, the way that we know that is we've had cases of positive cases of COVID among some of the staff involved, as well as some of the students involved from community spread. And so then we've had to at least go through that process of contact tracing and notification. And so we have done that. And so we do feel very confident that we have something that works.
Thank you, Dr. Bowers, and thank you, Mr. Van Schack. Moving on to another question. We have planned for the possibility of coming back partially in the form of a hybrid option. Can you share where we are now in consideration of implementing hybrid at the elementary level?
Sure. I'd like to take that one as the person who's overseeing the reopening task force since back in summer. This is a group of about 50 to 60 people who've come together and discussed this for months. And so really the elementary hybrid schedule, which has been developed to provide an opportunity for our elementary students, starting at the youngest age, to come back on campus, really is structured around some of the limitations being placed on us by the county. And that's primarily physical distancing, which eliminates our opportunity to bring larger numbers of students back. And so our hybrid schedule really is about having a 50% student population on campus at the elementary school at a time. And so the two systems really that the task force narrowed it down to is AM PM, which means half the students in the morning, half the students in the afternoon, or a 2-day a week, which half the students come, for example, Monday, Wednesday, the other half come Tuesday, Thursday. And so we narrowed it down to really those two options is the best educational and the best in terms of our ability to implement. The task force was really divided on which of those two would be best. There's obviously some advantages and disadvantages to each. When we handed that off to our elementary principals, they were unanimous that they thought the AM PM schedule better met the needs of students because it got students together on a more frequent basis and allowed them to interact with their teacher, and took away really the 3 days a week of very independent learning. And so the AM PM schedule was determined to be, again, the best one educationally for students. And so that was one that we began to look at. We did some polling of our parents to ask them, which they would prefer. And it was really not so much between the different types of hybrid, but whether or not they would want to move into a hybrid schedule, which is part in person and part independent learning, or whether they would like to stay in distance learning. And so that information came back and allowed me to work with the individual school class rosters and teacher rosters to develop a scenario in which you can see from the chart that I'm going to show you in just a second here, what that looks like. And again, I just want to explain that this is done with live data. So this is a school in our school district, and I selected this one because this is a school in which all of the teachers are medically able to come back to hybrid learning, to participate in in-person learning. So as you can imagine, there are a number of teachers, close to 20% of the teachers in our district who have either medical conditions themselves or have dependent family members with medical conditions that would prevent them from returning. So this is not one of the, this is a school in which we have full options open. And so what I did is I went through each class and looked at each student and what their preference was, whether it was distance or hybrid. And then I created class rosters for distance teachers and hybrid teachers. And I'll just show a couple of examples just so you can see the process. At the transitional kindergarten level, at this particular school, we have one teacher. 15 of the 21 students indicated that they would like to remain in distance. And so we put that teacher into a distance position. 15 of those students obviously would get to stay with that teacher. The other 6 who would like hybrid would have to be displaced because we don't have a second teacher at this school site whose class we can put those students into. So at the kindergarten level, we have 4 teachers. We had a fairly equal number of students asking for either hybrid or distance. And so we placed 2 in distance and 2 in hybrid. The way I selected those teachers is I selected the teachers whose majority students wanted distance, and I made those distance teachers, and the teachers whose more students wanted hybrid, and I put them in hybrid. And as you can see from this chart, in this particular class, 56 of the students, and that's 56 of 89, would get to keep their same teacher, whether that be in hybrid mode or in distance mode. 28 would have to be placed into the classroom of another teacher, and 5 would have to be displaced. And so again, not to belabor the point, but I went through class by class, student by student, teacher by teacher, and you can see at the bottom, 325 students would get to keep their same teacher at this school. 217 would be placed in the classroom of a different teacher, and then 16 students would be displaced, and you can see the percentages below. And the reason I point that out is just to show that if we were to move into a hybrid system at the elementary level, there would be some number of students who would be significantly disrupted by that. Now, following this information being gathered, a third option was identified, which would be the parents who merely want to keep the same teacher and they're willing to go either hybrid or distance. And because we believe that would change these numbers, perhaps dramatically, it's hard to say, we are going to do an additional survey and essentially ask that question. Can we get that 58% with the same teacher number up even more significantly so that a hybrid schedule at the elementary level would look more attractive? As it is now, again, close to 40% of our students in week 22 or 23 of the school year would find themselves with a new teacher, which is a significant disruption. And so by offering that third option, would a move to hybrid be less of a disruption for a greater number of students? So that's kind of what we did at the elementary level. Again, that survey is going to go out. That gives us additional information to determine whether or not hybrid is a good direction to go. I think, as Dr. Bowers alluded to a bit earlier, actually she didn't allude to it, she stated very explicitly, with a vaccine on the horizon, we're very enthusiastic about the opportunities that might provide us. And if it takes us longer to organize a hybrid than it takes to get our employees vaccinated, then it becomes a moot point. And just also to keep in mind, this hybrid schedule there are some requirements regarding community spread that we'd have to get under control before we could consider this either. So again, we're at very best case scenario, we're probably a month away from a hybrid at our elementary level, even thinking most optimistically.
Thank you, Mr. Benchak. Appreciate learning more about the elementary hybrid possibilities. We have a number of questions asking about plans for middle and high school. Could you please explain whether hybrid is an option for middle and high school, and what would that look like? And many want to know whether sports and other activities can resume this school year for our students.
So really the governor has been focused and really from the very beginning on getting elementary schools open. And that's because of some of the unique challenges that the secondary level creates when you're changing classes every 50 or 60 or 70 minutes in our high schools. Maintaining a stable cohort, which has been one of the health conditions from the very beginning, which is a group of students who stay together. That's not a possibility at the middle and high school level. And so as long as that remains a requirement that a group of students stay together, it's very, very difficult to imagine how a schedule could be rolled out in a manner that was educationally sound. That does not stop us from the creation of a hybrid schedule, though. We do have schedules that we've created at both the middle and the high school if we choose to go that direction. I'll show you just, for example, the proposed middle school hybrid schedule. We're hopeful that that the stable cohort model would be relaxed, and this gives you really a quick overview of how we would move students into different classrooms. Again, keep in mind, all of these models are built around the premise that we can only have a limited number of students on campus at any given time. And again, at the middle school level in Livermore, our middle schools are between 600 and 1,000. We think that about 50% student population on campus at any one time would help us to meet the county requirements. And so this is a hybrid system that creates two separate cohorts. And again, gets students seeing their teachers on a more regular basis in person. At the high school level, the challenges are even more significant because at Livermore High, we have 1,900 students. At Granada High, we have 2,300 students. And so the distancing requirements created by the county really prevent us from getting any more than about 25% of our students onto campus. And so these were the hybrid plans built for the high school, in which students really only get to see one of their teachers each day. And again, that's built around a requirement, the physical distancing requirement, and the need to have no more than 400 to 500 students on campus. And so these are both schedules that are subject to change based upon changing requirements. In the meantime, we are very hopeful that we can get students back on campus more quickly through a support hub strategy, which I will discuss a little bit later. But I do know that we are eager to get students back together in clubs, sports, music. Again, I'll discuss that down the road a little bit when we talk about support hubs. But really the hybrid schedule creates very, very unique challenges for the secondary level because of that current requirement that students maintain very small cohorts of students. As you can imagine, in a traditional high school schedule, students in 5 classes, 30 students each, that's 150 contacts they make just in the classrooms. And if the requirement right now is to keep it at 14 or fewer, that's just not a manageable system. And so again, we look forward to perhaps changing requirements, but we suspect that the likelihood of a vaccine and getting employees vaccinated is probably going to come before a change to high school, middle and high school requirements. I did want to mention also, as you suggested, there is the question of sports. We have North Coast section. That is our governing board, and the California Interscholastic Federation is the state governing board. They recently sent out this information, which indicated which sports were connected to which tier. And this gives us some measure of hope. As you can see in the purple tier, cross-country golf, swimming, tennis, track and field are still acceptable. If we move into the red tier, that opens up even more sports. The orange tier more, and then the yellow tier even more. And so the NCS, North Coast section, has provided us with guidance, and we are again optimistic that we can get our student athletes back together and participating in sports in the not too distant future. They've organized some shortened seasons, they've reduced playoffs, but again, the goal would be to get our athletes competing. Once again, we know that how important that is for them and for the community. So again, that's some good news that came out of NCS just last Friday.
Great, thank you, Mr. Banchak. All along, we've been hearing that distance learning will be an option for the school year. We are talking about the vaccine possibly coming back more fully. Will distance learning continue to be an option in this school year, even if we are fully back in school? Will we continue to improve it?
So I think I'll probably field that one. So distance learning was originally designed to be very temporary way back in March, and it was a transitional option. But what we have found is, as it has extended, that we've actually have been getting increasingly really good at it, and we are constantly improving in not only just the methods of instruction, but also in the kinds of programs and software that we are making available, and even newer adoptions, which are going to be more digital friendly. The other thing that's wonderful is now we have gone to one-to-one devices for every student. And so, so even though distance learning won't be a necessity going forward, it certainly could be an option that we maintain. And I think that is something that we'll see even more, and it could end up in more of an independent study modality, or it could also be something that some families just feel more comfortable. If you look at colleges right now, many students opt for a distance learning model. And we actually have some teachers who are so skilled at it, they may prefer it. You never know. So I think it will remain an option. There's a lot of research that just says distance learning is one of those disruptive things that came about, not necessarily voluntarily in all instances, but it will probably stay. So that's kind of how things work. But so far as for this year, we have always said, and I'll reiterate it, we are committed to keeping distance learning as an option for 2021-22. And in a hybrid scenario, as Mr. Benchak pointed out, that might result in some shifting because there's not going to be a clean match between staff that is able medically to come in person and or those who would be choosing either option. But I think it is here to stay. And even though that's the case, what I believe will happen is we look toward next year, and I saw one of the questions in the chat was asking about that, is that next year it would probably be an option, but I really would hope that it's not our default or primary one. But we do have times when we've had poor quality air days. There might be power outages at a school site, but then possibly people could access at home with their technology. So I think it's something that's now, it's, as our nurse said earlier, it's just something else that's in our toolbox. But we will constantly improve it. We've changed and added Zoom. We've added new programs. We've just more recently made adjustments to provide more structure to Wednesdays per our board's direction. So all of those things, it's a constantly continuous improvement process.
Great, thank you, Dr. Bowers. We know that there are currently a number of small group cohorts currently serving students on our campuses. These cohorts are typically serving students with higher needs. Could you explain the difference between small group cohorts and support hubs? What is the timing and criteria for students who want to participate in academic support hubs?
Sure, I'll answer that. So really, as you mentioned, there's two different groups. One is the high needs cohorts, and those are cohorts of students, and they are limited in number to 14, and they are typically students either in special education, English language learners. They could be students who have internet access issues at home, and so they need to come in and use maybe the library. They could be students who are struggling academically that have been identified by the school resource team as in needs of intervention. So those are groups that we can bring in even in the purple tier, and we have been bringing those students in fairly large numbers for a couple of months. And so those can continue, and those can even expand based upon our needs. The way those students are identified typically is there are meetings at the school sites, administrators, teachers, support personnel such as resource teachers, school psychologists, speech and language therapists, etc. They come together and they identify the students who they believe to be in the most need of in-person support. And so those high needs cohorts, they will continue, those will expand as they are necessary. The second component of that we're excited about are the support hubs. And really the support hubs are geared toward a much greater variety of students. And they could be there to meet social emotional needs of students, the needs of students to get together, could be for academic pursuits, it could be for tutoring, music, art, it could be intramural sports. There are a number of different reasons to bring these support hubs together. We are not able to open support hubs until we've been in red for 2 weeks. And so I know that's one of the things on the horizon, particularly at the secondary level, is an opportunity to bring more of our students on campus in these groups that they're not as carefully governed by regulations, because it is when we get to the red tier and it opens up just a little bit. But we're hoping to get, again, large numbers of our students. We had begun the process prior to break when the county moved. We had really made progress as a community. We'd gotten into the orange tier. We were excited to open these support hubs, and we went from orange into deep purple. I think this is just after the Thanksgiving break, when a number of people got together with families and other members of their social circle, and we went from a county infection rate of around 3.5 per 100 to over 40 within a 2-week span. And so that eliminated our ability to open these support hubs, but we are cautiously optimistic that we're going to be able to get back to that pretty soon and give students that opportunity that we really want them to have to interact with their fellow students.
And when we do these kinds of small learning cohorts, we work in tandem with our nurses and with our county. And so I'll give you just a brief example. So for instance, the PSAT, which is a very important test that I feel professionally could really influence students' futures and their futures chances. So it's much more important than, say, just one lesson in a school day, one in isolation. So it's something that's very important. It's something that was important for students not to miss out. And even though they have an alternative, if their families don't feel comfortable, we worked very closely. Our high school administrators have worked very closely with our nurses, and they have an approved plan for us to offer in the small cohort model this it's not a mandated test, but it's a very critically important one. And so similar to our philosophy last year, when we made sure that we had our graduation in a way that took a lot of extra effort and logistical planning, but turned out to be actually pretty wondrous and memorable in many good ways. This is the way we're approaching things. And so we are very aware, acutely aware of the many things that have been constrained from us doing, but when we see that we can do something, we make it work. And that's a group effort in order to have happen. So on January 26th, our students, probably some of the only in the entire area, will be able to take the PSAT on our campus.
And I just wanted to speak to those small group cohorts too. I'm on several of those teams within the district, and those are teachers who are directly involved with the students that are maybe needing some extra help, that submit those to the team to sort of review and find a cohort for those kids to get into. So those teachers who see those kids every single day are directly responsible for getting those kids into some of these cohorts. So they're really looking after them and watching them hard.
Great. Thanks, Mrs. Ricciardo, Dr. Bowers, and Mr. Van Schack. Question number 9. I know I speak for myself and many parents that I know around the community and indeed nationwide. We're all very grateful to our teachers for their dedication and support of students during distance learning. Several questions were asked about the role of the teachers union in planning our return to school. Could you provide an understanding of how our district and teacher leadership work together during this time? Mr. Van Schack?
Thank you. And I know I'll probably ask Ms. Thompson to weigh in as well. I think first of all, I just want to dispel a couple of, I won't call them myths, but I'll say maybe misunderstandings. I hear from a lot of parents, I love my teacher, but I hate the union. And I think people need to recognize that those aren't two separate groups. The union is a collection of teachers, and you can't love one and hate the other. And the union isn't some outside monster that comes in and forces its will upon us. And so I think in some cases the narrative has been that our union are obstructionists, and that is absolutely 100% not the case. We have worked very closely with our union to understand their concerns. Obviously, all of their members, and not the union, but all of their members. We have 650 teachers, another 900-ish other employees. They want to work in safe conditions. And so we've been in conversations with the Livermore Education Association leaders and negotiating team from the very beginning. They represent individual teachers, the classroom teachers that parents love. That's who they represent. We've been working with them to identify the working conditions in which they will feel safe. And it hasn't been a list of demands. It hasn't been, hold our arm behind our back and twist until we give them what they want. They want working conditions in which their members feel safe. And the conditions that I mentioned earlier about sanitization, personal protective equipment, ventilation, those are the working conditions I'm talking about. They want safe conditions. They want conditions that are safe for them and for students. And so we have very much been in this with our teachers, and they have not been creating obstacles for us. They'll bring to our attention conditions that are like, well, we weren't aware of that, or, in one hand, the CDC is saying you can't have adequate ventilation unless you keep all your doors and windows open. That doesn't sound so exciting when it's 27 degrees outside. And so people say, how do we manage this and that? And so again, we've gone through, we've had engineers go in and look at our ventilation systems in our classrooms to ensure that we can have proper ventilation even with the doors closed. And so they've been partnering with us. And so I know that the social media narrative has been, teachers are getting in the way of opening schools. And again, I've said this before, I'll say it again. That is not the case in Livermore. I can't speak to other communities. I can't speak to the relationships that they have, but I know I can speak to the relationship that we have, which is we want the same thing. We want kids back in school, but we want it to be safe. We want it to be safe for kids. We want it to be safe for adults, recognizing that safe is different for the different groups. You hear the research that says the spread isn't as great in students as it is in adults, but they work in the same place. And so we really need to accommodate the needs of both. And so, like I said, our teachers have been working with us. They've been working with us on schedules. They've been working with us on establishing protocols for identifying students who are at risk. I just want to dispel that narrative, the myth out there that it's the community or the district against the teachers. And once we can convince them or talk them into it, then we'll reopen. That's not the case. We all want safe conditions, safe working conditions. The union has been asking for safe working conditions from the beginning. We have not been resisting that. We are there to identify what that means and then to ensure that those are in place. And I didn't mean, I'm sorry, Ms. Thompson, I didn't mean to speak on behalf of your opinions. Certainly it will let you speak to them yourself, but I did want to, Mr. Von Heater, I did want to make it really clear that whatever message is out there that says, the unions are in the way of schools reopening, 100% false. Amy, Ms. Thompson, did I miss anything?
Thank you, Mr. Van Schack. No, I think you covered it very well. I think we have partnered our teachers union